Hi. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming to tonight's program. My name is Luke, and I'm an intern at the JES. It's my pleasure to kick off tonight's event, and I'm here to do three things: go over some housekeeping notes, tell you about some upcoming JES events, and finally introduce tonight's presenter. But first, some housekeeping. If you need any assistance during the event, please feel free to find me. I'll be in the back. And some reminders for the Q&A portion. After the presentation, please raise your hand to be called on, and please project your voice as best as possible. And please try to keep your questions brief and concise, and try to refrain from offering lengthy statements. Now on to some upcoming events. Tomorrow, Tuesday, April 22nd at 6 p.m., Dr. Judy Lynch will take stage at the Corey Higher Educational Council to present America's Early Frontier, Economic History of Northwestern Pennsylvania. Then, on Wednesday, April 23rd at 6 p.m., Dr. Bayard Gaucher will deliver a lecture at the Harbor Creek Township Building called Beyond the Headlines, Understanding Gaza, Hamas, and What Lies Ahead. Finally, on April 24th at 7 p.m., Dr. Ken Louie will be speaking about economic inequality at the national and local level, long-running trends and political consequences at the Erie Center for Arts and Technology. Finally, I'd like to introduce you to tonight's speaker, Dr. Jeff Bloodworth. Dr. Bloodworth is a professor of history and co-director of the School of Public Service and Global Affairs at Gannon University. Bloodworth holds a PhD in modern United States history from Ohio University's Contemporary History Institute and a certificate in contemporary history from the University of Copenhagen. He specializes in 20th century political history. His book, Losing the Center, The Decline of American Liberalism, was nominated for the Ellis W. Hawley and Frederick Jackson Turner Awards. In addition, he is midway through a biography of Speaker Carl Albert, who presided as majority leader during the Great Society and Civil Rights era and as speaker during Watergate. Without further ado, let's give Dr. Bloodworth a warm JES welcome.
All right. Good evening. I live in Erie, so I can't complain about the sun. So I try to stay on script. Well, hopefully I won't be too blinded. Let's see if we can make this work, because this thing doesn't exactly have wheels. Is that possible? Maybe to... Mom, please. Okay, it's fine. Sam, it's okay. Sam, it's fine. Everything's fine. Okay. So. Anyway, good evening. I want to thank everyone for coming out on a sunny Easter Monday. My wife, as you saw, trying to do tech support. Dr. Paris Baker, my colleague at Gannon, turned out. I appreciate it. Look, it's an especially somber day for Catholics and people of goodwill from across the world. Pope Francis's death causes at least me, and I think others, to reflect upon a life of a visionary religious leader. I want to thank Ferky and Ben and Jake and Luke, my student, for introducing me and inviting me to be part of the men's series. I appreciate their faith and my ability to say something original and important in what is a very tumultuous era. Hopefully I'll redeem their faith this evening. Without further ado, I've titled my talk, Everyday People Aren't Stupid, The Men's Crisis and Elite Culture. Everyday people aren't stupid. Cassandra Sever, who's pictured up there, she knows this. She's the daughter of a rural South Carolina hairdresser. She was reared in working class America. Today, Dr. Sever professes sociology at the nation's oldest and arguably most prestigious women's institution of higher learning, Mount Holyoke College. A foot in both the ruby reddest and sky bluest of worlds, her unique insight, if you'll excuse me, I have to figure out this here clicker. There we go. Her unique insight, being from a very red place and a blue place gives her some very unique insight. From this, she posits, quote, working class Americans have come to believe my identity is not worthy, and how I live is not good. And we see this in the indices, from suicide rates and life expectancy to family dissolution and the political nihilism of the moment. This is what Sever terms a culture of despair which abounds. Economics, to be sure, are part of this. Deindustrialization, globalization, and union busting have hit the working class hard. Now, this is a nebulous term, the working class. In general, the working class possess less formal education, make less money, and generally hold service or manual labor jobs. And I don't know, for those of us who grew up working class, it's always weird to define it, because if you grew up with it, you're like, why are these fancy people trying to define it? You know the life if you grew up in it. But in 2025, class comes down to what we call the diploma divide. A college degree is what largely determines a contemporary American's class and life trajectory. In the age of Donald Trump, it is the diploma divide and class that also shapes American politics. In 2024, a majority of low-income Americans voted Republican for the first time in a generation. Trump took 56% of voters without a college degree and 55% of all men. Kamala Harris, meanwhile, won the college-educated by 14 points, and those earning $100,000 or more. And for a historian like me who studies the history of the Democratic Party and American liberalism, when a Democrat wins a majority of those earning $100,000 or more, I mean, you know something is different, something has changed. And Trump's win was not just with the white working class. In relation to 2020, Trump increased his share of the non-white, non-college vote by 8 points. Kamala Harris had Beyonce, Luke Skywalker, and $2.3 million in campaign cash from Harvard faculty. And that's exactly why she lost. Trumpism is buoyed by a multiracial working class coalition. To defeat Trumpism, I believe one must understand America's class divide and its sources. And this is where it intersects with the men's crisis. To understand the man's crisis is to also understand our class divide and its material and social roots, and the role that the social justice intelligentsia unwittingly plays in promulgating it. Between 1979 and 2005, the wages of those with a bachelor's degree or postgraduate degree jumped by 25%. In roughly the same time span, college-degreed professionals, or the top 20% of American households, gained $4 trillion in wealth. The bottom 80% divvied up the crumbs. At the same time that the college degree earned 25% more, wages for those with a high school degree or high school dropouts fell. By 2023, and I just find this a stunning number, the median weekly wage for a working class man was $852, which was only a smidgen higher adjusted for inflation than it was in 1979. So to put that in English, a working class man between 2023 and 1979 barely got a raise. To be sure, working class women still lag behind their male counterparts. I mean, the gender divide in pay, the gender gap still exists. But this gender gap pales in comparison to the diploma divide. In 2025, the diploma divide is America's class divide, and the diploma divide is increasingly a problem for men. In the 1980s, men were more likely to hold a college degree than women. Today, that reality has flipped. 64% of men have no college degree, compared with 50% of women. Today, women comprise nearly 60% of all college students, and that percent climbs every year. All working class Americans face strong economic and education headwinds, but working class men face the stiffest challenges. Globalization disproportionately offshored their jobs. Artificial intelligence promises more of the same. 3.1 million men drive a truck for a living. It's the most common job for a high school educated man in America. But driverless, long-haul vehicles have already arrived. Trucking jobs are not going to disappear, but they're going to dissipate. Richard Reeves, who penned the widely lauded A Boys and Men, observes, quote, "The long-term story here is the growing wage gaps by social class, by both men and women, but with working class men faring worse of all in terms of trend," end quote. To worry about men, especially for those on the political left, is foreign. For a generation, America's left intelligentsia has rightly turned its egalitarian focus to sexism, racism, and homophobia. Strides were made, much work remains. Sexism, racism, and homophobia are real obstacles to Americans seeking their part of America's bounty. But in 2025 America, we must add issues of class, and working class men in particular, to the mix of those left behind by an economy and culture in rapid transition. The 1994 North American Free Trade Agreement pushed nearly 1 million working class jobs, manufacturing jobs, to Canada and Mexico. And I feel strange talking about this in a place like Erie, where I think we all know this very well. 5 years later, and I think this is less recognized and appreciated, China earned most favored nation status. This so-called China shock, or shift of industry to China, pushed another 2 million working class jobs overseas. Globalization and free trade have undoubtedly enhanced American wealth, regional ties, and national security. The American consumer clearly benefits. Trade is a complicated economic and foreign policy issue that, as we see today, demagogues turn into political gold. But the benefits of free trade largely flow to the wealthy and educated middle class and knowledge economy metropoles. The working class, meanwhile, foots the bill in lost jobs and devastated communities. Drive most anywhere in the Rust Belt and you see the physical carnage. One of these was taken in Erie, PA, the other in Alliance, Ohio, right? And you see the physical carnage. Walk our neighborhoods and you witness the physical toll. Now, I'm a free trader. I think the free exchange of goods and people lead, and this is empirically proven, to a more affluent and stable world. At the same time, we need a free trade that benefits Americans of all classes more evenly. Free trade, free trade that benefits Americans in the aggregate is just simply not good enough. As a member of the professional middle class, I profit from free trade. I live a better life, okay? I realize that. But I also recognize that working class Americans have been left out of the fruits of that. Free trade most certainly hurts working class women, but it is men who've borne the brunt of the job losses. The left is very comfortable understanding material and economic forces. I grew up working class. I know that paychecks matter, right? I mean, it's weird. My wife and I talk about this every once in a while. It's very weird when you grow up working class to be middle class and to not hyperventilate about money. And that's a very new experience that I still have to pinch myself. And so, I know this stuff, okay? The demise of working class income, this is driving the men's crisis. But humans are also driven by intangibles. And I think this is something that the academic left has a harder time getting their mind around, are the intangibles, the spiritual and emotional factors that also matter. Globalization also came on the heels of second-wave feminism and the long overdue revolution in Western gender roles. Losing their traditional role as provider to wage stagnation, globalization, and women's liberation, working-class men of all races have struggled to find their footing. Detached from robust connections and meaning, working-class men drop out of the workforce, lose ties to families, and too often die young and alone. Now, I feel the need to say this. I'm a feminist, right? I have a picture of my wife, Dr. Sam Mason. She's a prominent research scientist. I think my life experience proves that I'm not challenged by strong, educated women. I'm a son of a single mom who's also here, who worked 2 jobs to put food on the table. I was a feminist before I even knew the word. I can't count how many times as a kid that people mistreated my mom because she was a working class woman with a Southern accent. That made me into a staunch feminist. But I want to make this clear. One can be a feminist and also be worried about men and their difficulties to adjusting to this changed world. To understand how men have adjusted to a world of greater gender equality, I spoke to Frank Spring. Now, Spring is a progressive political consultant. In other words, he leans left. And in 2024, he conducted a deep ethnographic study of adult men. So he was working for Democrats who were trying to win in a tough environment. And he and his team spent 3 days talking to a series of men across kind of the demographic spectrum. And what's interesting when I talked to Frank is that the results surprised him. He discovered that these men possessed, quote, no resentment at feminism. And again, this is not what Frank expected to find. right? But what he said is that what surprised him is that, but they feared they had something to lose, right? Their greatest fear, he found, and again, this was across racial differences, across class differences, Republicans, Democrats, independents. Their greatest fear was that, quote, someone, meaning an employer, could make you work a job that you hate. And the emotional toll would force them to go back and have to be like their dads and be a material provider only. They come home, crack open a beer, watch TV, tune out, and not have these emotional bonds with their wives or their spouses and their kids. That's a world that they didn't want to go back to. They didn't want to be a material provider only. Across the board, their metric for a successful life was not about money. It was, quote, they only want to matter to someone. Their highest priority revolved around being reliable for those who are important to you. Now, I'm an academic. I talk to liberals and progressives all day long, and this is the discourses that they see on Twitter, or we call it X now, whatever the hell it is, right? Forget, the trad man. And I've come to, after talking to Frank, like many things on social media, it's not real. Right? Forget the trad man social media hype. I'm going to listen to Frank instead. Most men, and I'm a man. I talk to other men. Working class, educated, they're generally not anti-feminist. Are there some out there who are? Sure. But generally they're not. They're just experiencing cultural vertigo from a rapidly changing world. Okay? And social justice need not be a zero-sum game. We can walk, meaning address issues of race and misogyny, okay, and chew gum, meaning heed problems of class and working class men simultaneously. If you care about defeating Trumpism, the latter is absolutely paramount. Working class men and their issues are not just a matter of gender. Nearly 2/3 of all men, 64%, are working class. A bit more than half of them are white. But almost 8 of 10 prime working age Latino and African American men are working class. By definition, working class men and their travails is also a matter of racial justice. But I don't think it is in the way that today's social justice left envisions. 2025's color line is not the racial divide of the past. And again, I'm not denying that racism doesn't matter. Just hang with me for a minute, okay? In the 1960s, to be African American was by definition to be in America's economic underclass. In 1960, only 10% of African Americans held a middle class job. The Civil Rights Revolution changed that equation. Let's see if I can get this to change. Are you going to change for me? There we go. Today, nearly 50% of African Americans are middle class. To be sure, this is all the studies show this. The African American hold in the middle class is more tenuous than that of whites. But the Civil Rights Revolution has changed the economic prospects for Black Americans. In 2012, William Julius Wilson, a personal intellectual hero of mine, he is the preeminent urban sociologist of his era, and he reissued his now classic, The Declining Significance of Race. In that book, he kind of rediscovered and reconfirmed that class had become stickier than race in determining life chances. To be sure, he's not saying that race is not sticky. He is just saying that class is becoming stickier. For middle-class African Americans, this is good news. For working-class African Americans, it means they, like their white and brown brethren, get pulverized by a globalized economy. Yes, poor African Americans get macerated worse than others, but the diploma divide, not race, is the key determinant. Drive on any one of America's 955 Martin Luther King boulevards. This is the wonderful things you can find on Google. And you will see reasons for pessimism. African American men are disproportionately victims of police violence. But a deeper dive shows that poor Americans of all races are disproportionate victims of a militarized police state. This is Wilson's thesis in action. Racism matters. Indeed, class exacerbates existing racial disparities. He doesn't argue that race doesn't matter. He's saying that class is becoming increasingly more important than race. But more and more, class, not race, is the key to understanding the roots of 2025 America's underclass. if you want to understand why working class African American and Hispanic men, and again, we can disagree on the numbers, right? I mean, polling, I think, as we know, especially exit polling, is not a perfect science. But African American men and Hispanic men, according to all the polls, shifted toward Trump. I think we should look no further than Wilson's classic work. In relation to Biden in 2020, Harris's white working class support dropped slightly from 37 to 34%. Her vote share of the non-white working class fell nearly 3 times as much. I strangely, oddly went to the Trump inaugural to be a talking head on TV. And this is totally anecdotal. This is what Tom Friedman does in the New York Times. He talks to cabbies. So now I talk to Uber drivers. And I had, he was a South Asian Uber driver. And we were driving. And somehow politics came up because it was the inaugural. And I'm like, what do you think about Trump? And for the next 45 minutes, he extolled the virtues of Donald Trump. This is a Muslim American immigrant. And I was just like, I just listened and took notes with his permission. This is a reality. It might defy explanations for at least someone like me who's a college professor who lives in his bubble, but it's a reality. Harris's vote share of the non-white working class fell nearly 3 times as much as her vote share of the white working class. Biden earned 73% of the non-white working class. Harris took just 65%. And much of that decline came with men. Nearly half of Latino men under 40 voted Trump in 2024. I can't use his name. He lives in Erie. He's a Mexican American. But I wrote about him, and he's gotten unending grief from a lot of his neighbors. But he and all of his brothers who were under 40 years old all voted for Trump. I remember him posting about it on Facebook, and I reached out to him. He's a great guy. And I was like, hey, tell me why you voted Trump. And this is just a reality. So it's under 40 Hispanic men, half of them voted Trump. And about 3 in 10 African-American men below the age of 45 voted for Trump. And that was about double what Trump got in 2020. The electoral numbers tell a very clear story. Something is up with working class men. I know that's a very precise thing. Something is up. But let's start with there. Something's up with working class men of all races. And my boy, William Julius Wilson, I think we go back to him, the declining significance of race. What we see is that working class men, regardless of race, they're voting more similarly than they used to. And to attribute their votes to just sexism, which I think NPR, New York Times, and the stuff that highly educated people consume, I think that's reductionist. I don't think it means it's wrong, but I think that's too simple. It's something we want to believe. Why do they vote the way I don't like? Well, it's for a bad reason that I don't agree with. I don't think that gets to the heart of the matter. Doesn't mean sexism isn't there, but I don't think that explains it well enough. The forces for this are more complex. Paychecks matter. Higher wages fuel optimism and better life prospects. But for Dr. Sever, material forces only explain so much. She sees an American working class in the grips of what she calls a culture of despair. For her, the sources of that emanate from the intangibles derived from a culture that are driven by the social justice-minded intelligentsia. To Sever, elites drive what is meaningful to a culture and what we as a society recognize as valuable. Intellectuals drive what society values and what we are about, end quote. She sees that cultural signals sent to working class Americans amount to, quote, my identity is not worthy, how I live is not good. Culture, just as much as the paycheck, is driving this working class culture of despair. Now, you doubt Sever. That's a good thing to do. Okay, I'm making a case, make me prove it. In the early post-war era, the American intelligentsia viewed the working class as the primary vehicle for progressive or liberal political change. Authors and artists and singers ranging from Betty Friedan and Norman Rockwell to Paul Robeson and television shows like The Honeymooners or All in the Family valorized the working class. Yes, I know Archie Bunker said all kinds of crude things, but at the center, people liked Archie Bunker, right? Edith Bunker, for some reason, loved him, right? He and Meathead they had a rivalry, but, it wasn't depicting Archie Bunker as this terrible person. Now, he might have had some terrible, crude views, but that's different. I mean, it is an example of a working class that was valorized in popular culture. Times changed. By the 70s, especially the late 70s, the left-leaning intelligentsia blamed white working class for the nation's racism, chauvinism, and imperial tendencies. Elite opinion gravitated into pop culture. Today, the American working class, in particular, the white working class male, is either a punchline or a punching bag for the social justice left. Richard Butch, a sociologist who studies media, examined more than 400 situation comedies. He found a television mainstay in the working class male buffoon. Butch writes of these characters, quote, "They were dumb, immature, irresponsible, and lacking in common sense. The man was typically well-intentioned, even lovable, but no one to respect or emulate. From Peter Griffin on The Family Guy to Al Bundy on Married with Children, how did he afford that home being a shoe salesman? No one will ever know. To the entire cast of Honey Boo Boo or Duck Dynasty, the white working class, and especially men, are punchline. And this is not merely an American phenomenon. Lord Melvin Bragg, a BBC broadcaster and author, noted about British television, quote, "I'm not a fan of the working class being mocked. We've got to the stage where the working class has been turned into a cliche. In Britain, the chav has become an archetypical working class TV character." Now, this is an acronym for a bureaucratic term. Council house is what the British call public housing. So it means council house and violent. So if you went to public housing and you found someone who was difficult and violent, you would write down council house and violent, or CHAV, chav. A chav wears a tracksuit and sports cheap hairdos, but they also provide low-rent humor on British TV. Owen Jones, who penned Chavs, the demonization of the working class, discovered his idea at a fancy upper-crust dinner party. In the middle of the Great Recession of 2008, the dinner host cracked, quote, "It's sad that Woolworths is closing. Where will all the Chavs buy their Christmas presents?" End quote. Even social democratic Sweden is not immune. Goran Eriksson finds that Swedish television mocks the working class, quote, representing them as slow, inflexible, undynamic, and unstylish. David French, a New York Times columnist, observes, quote, "Mocking poor whites is among the last acceptable forms of bigotry. This holds true on both sides of the Atlantic." Donald Trump, the perception that rural working class whites comprise his base, has only exacerbated elite condescension. Derision of the rural white working class is gendered. The focus of the ire and stereotypes are aimed at men. Working class white women are also demeaned by cultural elites, but it is men who bear the brunt of the cultural bile. Lindley Thorne, this is a woman I interviewed recently, she's a liberal political director, and again, emphasis on the word liberal, okay? And she helps run the Rural Ground Game. It's a Virginia-based Democratic group. And she told me that the Democrats' rural rights strategy amounts to, quote, "We have the best policies, you dumb hicks," end quote. Jess Piper, this is another woman I've spoke to recently. She's the liberal executive director of Blue Missouri. She helps coordinate Democratic races, not only for Democrats in rural Missouri, but for Democrats throughout the rural Midwest. She told me bluntly, quote, "Liberals hate people." She is constantly told by urban educated counterparts, quote, "You got what they voted for," end quote. In their 2024 best-selling, go back. It's not in there. That's okay. In their 2024 best-selling White Rural Rage, which is a book nobody should read because it's so terrible, Tom Schaller and Paul Waldman exemplify this. The duo sold scads of books and garnered loads of media attention for a thinly researched work of what academics we now have a term for it. It's called rule bashing. And rule bashing is largely aimed at white working class men. Lisa Pruitt, a UC Davis law professor, studies rule bias in the law. And I've gotten to know Lisa Pruitt a little bit in the last few years. She's a liberal who grew up in rural Arkansas. Like Sever, she leads a blue life, but was reared in a red world. She writes of rule bashing she sees, quote, "Indeed, among denizens of the largest cities and coastal elites, rural Americans have become a proxy for the working class, the uncouth, the uncultured, and yes, the illiberal. I contend that social progressives reserve their greatest contempt and increasingly also their ire for whites in rural America, the vast majority of whom are working class, end quote. And I know this is being broadcasted, but I'll say it anyway. Lisa wrote kind of a part memoir, part academic book that was with a big press in New York City. And she was writing about this, and the press just canceled her book because they didn't like what she was saying. There you go. This elite condescension does not go unnoticed. Again, this is another gentleman I've gotten to know, Anthony Flacavento. He's a liberal. Again, all of these are liberals. He ran twice for Congress in rural Virginia, lost twice. Today, he works with what is a really good organization, the Rural Urban Bridge Initiative, which is dedicated to healing polarization. He told me rural whites, quote, believe Democrats just don't like them, end quote. In this case, when we use the words Democrats or liberals, these are synonyms for cultural and intellectual elites. To punctuate, he said that his neighbors are, quote, damn proud, and they feel preached to and demeaned. Liberals in their experience don't respect working people or believe the educated think they might have something to learn from you. They are utterly and wholly aware of this, end quote. Closer to home is Kat DiVittorio, the assistant director for the Corey Higher Education Council. She's a Democrat. She has no love for Donald Trump, but living in Corey, she feels the elite condescension for rural white working class Americans. She recently told me, quote, the Democrats quit being the party of normal. They are the party of we are smarter than you. We are better than you. What kind of party runs on a we are better than you platform? And look, you don't have to agree with what all of these Democrats who live in rural America say, but they do have a perspective that we just marginalize or ignore at our peril. I've become, this is my thing in life. I write about rural Democrats, God help me. And I can't tell you how often I run into this, African American and white, because rural America is more diverse than what we often realize. Again and again and again, what I was writing about an African American Senate candidate running in Mississippi. Great guy who wrote a really wonderful memoir, a real American success story. And I was talking to him, his campaign manager, and I'm like, you know, the Democratic Party hired 12 full-time staffers for Erie County alone in 2024. That's how we got 75% voter turnout. And they were like, there was silence on the phone for about 20 seconds. And they're like, Jeff, do you know how many paid Democrat staffers we have in the state of Mississippi? And I was like, I don't know how many. And they're like, one. Mississippi is a state that could turn, right? 40% of Mississippi is African American. You get 25% of the white vote. The demography is changing in the Memphis suburbs and on the Gulf Coast. They could elect an African American for Senate in 2026. Nobody gives them any money at all. Not at all. And again, this is rural bias, okay? It's an African American Senate candidate. So this is not just a white issue, okay? This issue of rural bias. Professor Sever thinks a social and political zeitgeist that demeans the working class in league with the diploma divide has created this culture of despair. Due to her working class roots, Sever is sensitive to working class depictions. She thinks it's the responsibility of intellectuals to be sophisticated in how we depict working class Americans. And what she means by this is, we were talking, and she was like, Jeff, highly educated people know the right language when we're talking about, I don't know, LGBTQ or African Americans or talking about difference. And she's like, a lot of working class people are really smart, but they don't necessarily have the same language that we do. And it's our job as intellectuals that when we write about them, that we try to interpret, we try to translate what they mean. But instead, what she finds, and I think she's onto this, is that we don't always depict them in sophisticated ways. Now, as she told me, quote, and I'm going to read her quote here, the working class can't package their terms, their ideas in the same way. So our job is to take, as she says, to take everybody seriously and translate them. And I think she's onto something when she says, instead, we vilify and shame them. Again, what Sever does is she's an ethnographer, and she studies elite students, elite college students, to assess and try to understand these depictions as they emanate from the social justice left, Now, I've used this term quite a bit, and I want to be clear, like, I'm all for social justice, and I'll talk about my political ideology, which I don't do much here in a minute. But according to the Pew survey, the social justice left comprises 7% of all American voters. The majority white, they are the second youngest of the nation's political typology groups. They are also one of the two groups with the highest share of college graduates. No single demographic group turns out to vote more or donates more money to candidates at a higher rate than the social justice left, meaning they're 12% of the Democratic electorate, 7% of all voters, but they possess a real wallop at the ballot box because they turn out, they give money, and they also, because they often go to elite institutions, they occupy the height in the nation's culture, media, and academic institutions. David Brooks, who came to our stage here at JES the summer before last, he sometimes writes about the social justice left. And he finds that the central idea animating them is an opposition to what he calls privilege. And this, to Brooks, is the contradiction at the heart of the movement. Disproportionately born to wealth or upper middle class comfort and schooled at elite institutions, Brooks writes, quote, "You have to prove to yourself and others that you are on the side of the oppressed," end quote. Because they possess the very class advantages they also disavow, there's a cognitive dissonance that he says has a radicalizing effect. Dr. Musa Al-Gharbi, a sociologist at SUNY Stony Brook, also studies the social justice left. His new book, which has gotten a lot of attention, which is called We Have Never Been Woke, Al-Gharbi found that the issues of racial justice is what separates the social justice left from every other demographic. Starting in 2011, the largely white social justice left began proffering woker positions on the issue of race than the average African American or Hispanic person. A social justice leftist does not merely believe that race matters or that racial advantages persist. Look, those are so obvious that race matters and racial advantages persist. Like, those are so obvious as to be almost banal conclusions. What makes the social justice left distinct is that it sees social justice as a zero-sum game of the oppressor versus the oppressed. To aid the oppressed and stand on the right side of history requires not gender or race-blind neutrality. Rather, social justice for the social justice left calls for tilting the scales against the oppressor. Sever studies the consequences of Brooks's radicalizing effect and Al-Gharbi's oppressor-oppressed dichotomy. In her ethnographic study of elite college students, the oppressor is invariably a straight, white, working-class man. She told me, quote, "If you ask them, the students will say, 'I like men.' But when she probes, 'How do you feel about them?' they open up. Sever is told, 'If I was born a bio man, I wouldn't be a toxic man.' She has discovered a knee-jerk belief that, quote, 'men are toxic inherently, even if they, quote, do the work.' She finds this to be a pervasive elite with elite college students. She concludes that these social justice leftists believed that there is something authentic that marginalized men possess, and biological men can never have this. Sever confided to me, quote, 'This is how they see reality. Biological white men are inherently repressive,' end quote. You doubt me? The term 'men suck' has become a common refrain that I hear my female students parrot out loud in a classroom without any sense. I mean, this is the middle of class. This is not the hallway, right? And they say this without any sense that male classmates may take offense. They just say it. Heck, professors are known to utter it in a classroom. If we wonder about why men's participation in higher education has plummeted, we should think about how welcome men feel. Now, we've created inclusive environments for young women. This is great. I'm a feminist. I think this is wonderful. But the environment in higher education, especially the humanities, is alienating for some men. Look, and I can speak from personal experience. This men's series itself has raised hackles at my institution. My supervisors pressured me to cease leading it. I ignored this pressure, but I'm pretty sure there's professional repercussions at Gannon coming for me because of this series. And I share this not to overshare, but I want you to get a sense. I mean, I didn't realize this till a couple of years ago, and I feel like the earth has kind of shifted underneath me. I mean, this is the state of academic freedom in 2025 higher education. Donald Trump is attacking academic freedom too. Harvard is fighting back. And like it feels weird, to put up the fist for an institution that has $25 billion endowment. But I know they're doing the right thing, right? Trump's actions are un-American and dangerous. They're authoritarian. But the social justice left is undermining academic freedom from within, and both need to be stopped. Again, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. On television, I go to great effort to comment on politics as a neutral observer, and I've gotten hate mail and hate postcards recently, which is a new experience. I try never to let my partisan thoughts intervene. Random Erie'ites will come up to me and tell me, I appreciate your comments. I don't know how you vote. And I really like that. I taught a class on the 2024 presidential election, God help me, right? And our French Fulbright, we have a Fulbrighter at Gannon, and she took the class. And she recently told me that before class started, the students were having debates about how I would vote. And I see that as a marker of my professionalism. I was really proud that students couldn't detect a partisan bias. I mean, I went to a conservative graduate institution. My intellectual mentor was a conservative. I was surrounded by conservatives. I was raised in Red America, but I'll let you in on a secret. This is a matter of public record. I'm a registered Democrat. I'm not only a registered Democrat, I'm a liberal Democrat. I write about America's reformist left because I want a robust liberalism to make my nation fairer and more just. I'm a nerd. I cry when I watch speeches by Robert Kennedy or Martin Luther King, which I do a lot. Okay, in 2010, does anyone remember when John Lewis came to Erie in 2010? John Lewis came here in 2010. I got to shake his hand. I didn't take a selfie because you don't do that with demigods. In 2016, I helped bring Diane Nash, who co-founded the student wing of the civil rights movement with John Lewis. I helped bring her to Gannon. It was a thrill of a lifetime. I'm a feminist. I almost did a PhD in African American history. So I'm not criticizing the social justice left because I don't believe in social justice, and I don't criticize it as a conservative, and I think that matters. I think that gives me a certain kind of heft, because I'm criticizing from within the tent and not from outside of it. A buddy of mine in grad school, we kind of decided conservatives should write about conservatives, and liberals generally are better writing about liberals, right? I mean, you're criticizing within the family instead of outside the family. And are there great conservative historians, political scientists who write about liberals? Absolutely. But in general, I think that's a good rule of thumb. But I say all of this is a center-left Harry Truman Democrat. But in today's academia, someone like me is deemed a pariah. And again, that's not about oversharing. This is just trying to get a sense of how the intellectual ground has shifted. I don't know how many times I've got screamed at conferences and been called a right-winger, which I kind of think is funny. It doesn't bother me because I'm not. But it tells you something about where, in the humanities and social sciences, where the ideological center of gravity is. If you're just a normie Democrat, you're a right-winger. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I come from Red America. I was always the most liberal person in the room, and now I'm in academia, which is the greatest job in the history of the world. A couple of years ago, my college-age stepdaughter, with whom I enjoy a good bond, was speaking about her classes. She rolled her eyes and exclaimed, quote, "Not another book by a white man." A generation ago, such statements, look, they were deserved, okay? But curriculums at elite schools such as hers are extraordinarily diverse. Her course readings were not dominated by white men. We've reached a point in elite circles where white male bashing has become a substitute for thinking. It's just what is said. It is pervasive. It is the air we breathe, and you can't tell me that male students don't feel this. Sever concludes that with the social justice demographic, quote, "men are not valued, they are loathed," end quote. Sever believed, and again, when I talked to Cassandra in December and interviewed for, I took me a couple of months to fully kind of accept this. I was like, whoa, Cassandra, are you really? But I've come to embrace most of what she says is reflective of reality. This study she sees is a representative example of the social justice worldview emanating from elite universities. 20 years ago, Ivy League schools were heterodox places that merely tilted left. Today, elite universities do not merely tilt left. The social justice left predominates. And because graduates of elite universities occupy the heights in culture, media, and academia, these ideas bleed into the mainstream via the New York Times, NPR, prestige TV, and movies. Now, my wife and I don't know if anybody else loves a good Scandinavian murder show, right? We love these things. We recently binged the R murders, and my Norwegian's bad, so I didn't pronounce that correctly. We loved it. But it, like so many programs aimed at highly educated Westerners, reflects how the social justice left's worldview has been mainstreamed. The problem is not that the lead detective is a young woman. She was a really engaging character and a good detective, even though it was a TV show. The issue is that nearly every single baddie was a one-dimensional man. The only complex male character in the entire show was gay. Otherwise, the men were either bumbling, and I'm not making this up, human traffickers, murderers, or abusers. I still liked the show. It was still enjoyable. But it was like watching gender roles from 1950s TV, right? You can watch I Love Lucy and still think it's funny and still wonder why exactly Lucy has to get permission from Ricky to spend money and kind of roll your eyes at it. But this was the Freaky Friday version of that. Working class Americans live downstream from elite culture. The oppressor-oppressed dichotomy is not in elite institutions, right? It has, like a virus, escaped the laboratory. And Sever believes the class of Americans most often depicted as the oppressors unsurprisingly don't feel valued. From TV to politics, she told me, quote, "When we value certain identities, we are not valuing everyone. When we lean in to value some, others are left out." She finds that young social justice elites conclude, quote, this is her quote, "Not being educated, being working class, those jobs are profane. Working class, what's to like about them? This is the ethos of elites." And I think what Anthony Flaccavento told me, he was like, working class Americans, like they're very aware of this view. The message sent to white working class Americans, according to Dr. Sever, is nothing short of, "You horrible people are all racists." Oops. Sever told me a culture needs to value all our people. You can't differentially value people. That is the code of a liberal society. We no longer even make this claim. I've come to conclude that there is no politics but class politics. The men's crisis is largely a working class male crisis. And the social justice left, and again, no matter how well-intentioned, and I know it is very well-intentioned, right? Some of these people are my friends. You know, they have great cheese at their parties. They like good movies. These are good human beings, right? It's all well-intentioned, but they're blind to their unwitting role in creating a culture of despair. The path out of Trumpism is through an intelligentsia that puts class at the center and ceases its oppressor-oppressed paradigm. The men's crisis is at the root of Trumpism, and the way out of both is a viable cultural and economic agenda that places the working class, not the professional middle class, at the center. Thank you. Okay. Now I can get out from behind that, and I guess this is time. If you have questions, I'm happy to take some questions. Yes, ma'am.
Do you believe that the incel movement is related to this?
Oh, yeah. I've come to, again, look, maybe that's a real thing. I hear about it on social media. And so I generally think if it's on X or social media, that it exists, but it's overhyped. But I think there are a lot of young men who are really struggling. And so when we talk about that, I mean, other college professors, Paris, you're a college professor. I mean, you see this with young men, don't you? Struggling and kind of emotionally not as able. As unable as you and I were at their age, we were more able than them, right?
I have lots to say later. I've been writing.
Okay, yeah. But
Yes, I would agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think young men are really struggling emotionally. And look, I got rid of my video game console in grad school because I saw where they were going and I would never leave my house. But I think there's a lot of young men who don't get out in the world and sharpen their emotional skills and interact with people. And the incel movement or involuntary celibacy, right, is, like, we've made it into a punchline. I mean, I'm not saying you have, but I hear it as a punchline a lot. And I think there's a lot of young men who are really struggling out there. And they're having a hard time adjusting. And I don't fully understand it, but they're having a hard time adjusting to this changed world. And, and it's a problem. It's a problem. And if you worry about Donald Trump and things that are going on in Washington, D.C., Joe Biden tied Donald Trump with the mail vote in 2020, right? I mean, that's how important it is. You take away the advantage of the mail vote with Donald Trump, he doesn't win. And the Republican Party would turn away from Trumpism if they lost. Yes, sir.
You put up the thing right at the beginning about the lack of men within going to college.
Yeah, yeah.
I grew up in the late 60s,
Mhm.
went to school in the late 60s. And a lot of the people who went to college, a lot of the men who went to college at that time were trying to avoid the draft.
Yeah.
There was a reason to go to college.
Yeah.
What's happened to whatever other reasons there are to go to college that these young men are not going to?
Yeah.
They get this fairness, this idea of, information that isn't being dumped on them from social media, but they get it from educators like you and Paris, people like that.
Yeah, so why aren't they going to college? Is that, yeah, I mean, it's strange. I know Dr. Baker, my wife is a college professor as well. Never has college meant more, right? I mean, if you get a 4-year college degree, unless you're pretty unlucky, right, you're going to be middle class, okay? And we see it all the time in the classroom where the students are like sleepwalking and they don't take it seriously enough. And it's men more than women. I've come to believe that, and what's his name? Our boy of Boys and Men, help me. Yeah, Richard, he writes about this, that I think one issue is that we don't have enough men in K through 12 education to serve as a masculine model, right? Men can be smart, right? And that's okay. And I think a lot of young men need that model that you can be a man, right, and be smart and appreciate books and learning. But I also think that, in higher education, we have developed an atmosphere. We spend a lot of time, and we rightly should, on making the atmosphere more accepting for women. And I think we need to put some thought into how, and again, this is about the bottom line. If universities want to stay solvent, you need to get more men. We need to figure out why men aren't going to college, because that is really the important question. How do we attract them and how do we keep them there? And I don't have all the answers, but I think part of the answer is that we have a milieu of the social justice left in academia that doesn't have an environment where men feel included. And that's not 100% of it, but I think that's part, and I'm a professor, and I'm always thinking, what can professors do better? And I think that's part of it. And I also think we should bring back the draft. I think a democratic nation should have a democratic army, but I'm not the only person who thinks that.
So I was recently reading an article about that very question that the gentleman just asked, and I want to hear your perspective on this proposition, that it's not necessarily just that it's a focusing on women and encouraging women into higher education, but also combine that with the increased difficulty for women to get into trades and trade schools.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see more women pursuing the more traditional academic college education, whereas men have more opportunity in trades that still hold a lot more patriarchal sense of what women are allowed to do. How would you fit that into this idea? I
think that sounds 1,000% correct. Right? I mean, I say this a lot, not all the time, but we talk about it in class, because I will talk about the men and challenge them, like, hey, the women are eating your lunch, right, when it comes to doing well on exams, because we've finally given women, equal opportunity in higher education, and they are banging down the door because I think of a real hunger and a real that's a really interesting, like, this is my way to get in the middle class. So I think you're 1,000% correct, right? That men think that there are other ways. I can drive a truck, and I would imagine that's an opportunity that is less open to a woman. So 1,000% correct. So both things can be true, right? That the trades are not open to women in the way that they should be. But also, you know, a 4-year college degree, and I don't want to live in an America where you have to have a 4-year college degree to be middle class. I don't want to live in that world, but I do. So until we change that, you know, and what is social justice? I want more men and I want more women in the trades, and I want more men. Again, my wife is the tradesperson, and if something needs to be fixed, my wife does it. Right? It ain't me. I'm not threatened by it, but I understand. I think you're 1,000,000% correct, and I want both to be more open. So I think you're right. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I'll take a couple of things.
Sure.
Issues. One is we know that the Generation Z is the most isolated, most depressed generation. And that isolation has caused a lot of problems that we are just now studying. And so to be isolated in a room where you only have a narrow view of the world, I think explains some of this. Emotional intelligence is going way down. That explains part of that's connected to that issue. The thing I wanted to bring up, though, is while we're talking about this aggregate of less men going to college, right underneath that, more African American men are attending college. And in fact, the data says our professor, whose name is escaping, Ivory Tolson, said because of the undercount, that you actually have more African American men in college than in prison. The statistic that it's 1/3 of every African American male is in some kind of prison, and 1/9 of every African American is under surveillance. He said that's just a myth. And so what we have to do is start promoting what's going on in the African American community. Part of it is connected now to another issue is affirmative action work. Yes. And so you have many more women attending college because affirmative action did work.
Yeah.
And then the last thing is, I understand that in the technological field, you don't have to go to college anymore. You can make a middle class or upper middle class wage in your bedroom. So there's a lot of factors I think that contribute to our understanding.
Yeah, the social isolation, you really see that. I mean, yeah, that's it. I did not know that. So we need to figure out what are we doing to attract African American men to colleges, and how can we replicate that?
Well, what happened was there was an underreporting of HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. So when you factored those numbers in, the numbers shot up really high. And so it's just the way it was reported.
Okay.
I don't know if there was any other phenomena that
Okay.
was working.
But now we're reporting it more correctly.
Right.
Yeah, and that is the shame of 2025 is that affirmative action works, right? And we are on the verge of a world in which affirmative action will be no more.
Right.
Yeah, which and we're going to see this so women, African Americans, other minorities will be hurt by that. This is not a zero-sum game. If I'm talking about men and I talk about rural whites, this is not pitting one against the other. This is about, I always thought democracy, right, and winning coalitions was addition, not subtraction. And I think the social justice left, and I am for social justice, but I think they often forget that it's about addition, not subtraction. Go ahead, please.
Just one last thing.
Yeah.
Put it in there, I forgot. I'm taking notes. Is there are less white people. Yeah. Population is shrinking. There are less white men. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
We're feeling that.
in the 70s, 70% of America were white working class, and that number, it's still the single largest voting demographic, it's 40%, but it gets less important every single year. Now, as voters, right? But yeah, most certainly. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just to piggyback, I guess, on what this man was saying about, back in the day, guys were motivated to go to college because of the draft. I think one of the differences now, I tell me what you think about this. I feel that the messaging, and the answer to this whole issue, it's multifaceted. It's 10% of this and 5%.
Sure, yeah.
There's a lot of different pieces to this puzzle. It's not just here it is, politics. It's a lot more than that. I think part of it that I see is the messaging. I was just kind of thinking this just the other day in anticipation of this talk. And I'm looking out the window and I look who goes jogging by me and it's probably about 7/8, it's young women. They're jogging.
Yeah.
I don't know where the guys are. They're not
Playing
jogging.
video games.
Girls, yeah. And I just kind of my brain just kind of went along on this idea, and I'm thinking, go back to the Obama thing, yes, you can. Yes, you can. And I think what young women have gotten far more so than young men is this message of, yes, you can. And I'm not saying it's good, and I'm not saying it's bad, and I'm not saying it's a plot. And I like how Reeves does that in his whole book, is how he talks about, look, I'm not trying to, be one side or the other. I'm trying to state fact.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to do here. But that's what and that's one of the pieces that I see, that they're getting a message like, hey, yes, you can. You can do it. And the guys are getting, I don't know what message they're getting, but they're not getting that. They're not getting that anywhere near to the extent that the girls are, the support.
Yeah.
The support groups and all that, even media, just to carry that a step further with the media thing that Reeves mentioned.
Yeah.
He talked about, okay, so guy, like it turns out guys really like it, they like to be smoke jumpers. Smoke jumpers, they parachute into the middle of forest fires, because it's really exciting and, guys really like it. So 99% of guys, 99% of smoke jumpers are guys, they're young men. It's like being a parachute race, but, you're jumping in. But who does the media go and interview? The one woman who says, now again, I'm not saying that's right and I'm not saying that's wrong, but you're kind of dissing 99% of the smoke jumpers who may have been doing this for how many years and risking their lives, and it is.
But you're showing women they can do that.
Yeah,
too, though.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that's right.
Showing,
Yeah.
you're saying that women aren't going to the trade schools. It's good if you promote it so women think outside
Yeah.
the box, and maybe I could go to a trade school so I could smoke
Yeah.
something that they make a lot of money. So
Yeah.
I don't know much about it, but if I saw something on TV or I'm not on social media, maybe as a woman I would say, oh gee, maybe I could do that. I think the other problem is too with the trade schools, is what people have said is that a woman goes and she's not readily accepted by the men. She's ostracized.
Yeah.
It's the same thing when they're trying to get like black people, even Michelle Obama in her book Becoming, you want to get a black on a board, but then you forget that it looks like you're into diversity, but it's not a good experience for the black person to be seen as a token white. And so people forget about that, they focus on the diversity, but they're not focusing on the experience of the person that they're putting on the board.
Yeah, I will say, and I will get to that. My wife is nodding her head, and I think there's something going on with young men, right? Like they're not saying to themselves, yes, we can. And it's, where's Luke? Where's my student Luke? Luke, you're the exception. But I mean, you see this man, right?
I have plenty of friends that are still in great middle class workers, and I think you hit it right on the head of like what I see just talking about.
Yeah, there is young men. Just there isn't the oomph and the drive, and maybe it's because young women know that they better get on top of it because they can fall really far really fast, and men have this sense that out of a sense, and there is such a thing as male privilege, that maybe you won't, but you're totally correct. And I do think in higher education what we see is men not feeling that they have a place in the same way that they did before, feeling a little bit kind of socially excluded. And again, 20-year-old boys, and I once was one, we're not always very good at including ourselves, right? We're behind women, and maybe we need a little bit more help. And kind of, if we go into colleges in the same way that a woman in a trade school would need a little bit of help, making sure that she's not marginalized, and we should do that. Part of what I think Gannon's admission policy, like how do we get these men and get them to school and get them to stay? There's something going on, and they need a little bit more help than my generation did. And again, it was, yeah, and it's more expensive. Yeah.
College has gotten almost, that people can't afford to go.
Yeah.
My husband used to teach at Mercyhurst here at Gannon. When I see with the tuition for those students who go to school, I say, oh my God, you can understand why a certain group of, people on the news and stuff are telling people not to go to college.
Sure.
Because you're not going to get return on investment for the money that you spend going there.
I just recently talked to a student, and she is at Gannon, and I think this is pretty typical. Her mom didn't go to college, and they're like, oh yeah, we signed these student loan papers, and we both said afterwards, what did we just sign? How many, I mean, if you don't have a family that understands college and you want to go to college, and I imagine there's some people out here who are like this, right? You know, and I like bumbled into college. I had no idea what I was doing. And then one day they're like, oh, Jeff, you can afford this. And you know, just by luck, because we were poor. But, you know, but school has gotten so much more expensive. I think there were some other questions thought I saw. Yes, sir.
We all came here to learn about something we thought would be interesting. But to make the changes we've talked about here, you have to have conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I know when I sit down with someone who's a different view than I have, and I'm being open-minded, and they're a nice person, they're open-minded, we quickly run into a roadblock of, where did you get your source of information, because I don't trust it.
Yeah.
Walter Cronkite died, or so I don't know where to go from there. When you say, well, this is my source, well, I don't know what that is, or my friend told me this, and he heard it from his uncle, who actually met with Donald Trump. I don't know where the sources are, but you can't have a conversation about change if you don't agree on what the facts are. And that's where things kind of immediately start to get roadblocked.
Yeah.
I can't talk to you about change because you don't agree with me about describing the world the way it is now.
Yeah. Look, you're totally correct. And this is where, like, if I'm ever as use of a historian, like 3 times a year. I grew up, you came of age in an era that is the exception in American life. All right, after World War II until the last 10 years, there was a time in which there were professionalized journalistic standards, national newspapers of records, national news, right, in which Walter Cronkite, I was young, that's the way it was, right? Can you imagine that? And that is an anomaly in American life. And we are back to the 18th and 19th century. It is the Wild West of crazy news sources. And look, I'm an academic, so I don't experience it in the same way that civilians do, you know, because I just live in this often silly, ridiculous world. It's a great world, but a little bit kind of like ridiculous sometimes. So I can only imagine. And I just have to think that if America muddled through it 100 years ago, we're going to have to find a way to muddle through it again. And it's about relationships, right? Ultimately, whether I heard it on NPR or, I don't know, Fox News.
I can ask you a question. And
Yeah.
say, here's what the research is.
Yeah.
And in fact, let me show you the 45 authors who did peer-reviewed
Mhm.
research. And I have an understanding of data and research from
Yeah.
my own background.
Sure.
So I go, that's convincing. Now I'm going to go talk to my friend who's a trucker.
Yeah.
I got nothing.
Yeah. Because they heard some talk radio show host.
And
Yeah.
maybe he's right, but I ask him where his information is from, and I don't trust that. So
Yeah.
the idea that relationships, we got a long way to go.
So 2 stories. So I grew up, I challenge you, I think I grew up in a more conservative, Donald Trump doesn't surprise me at all because I grew up in Trump's America my entire life. In the Deep South and the Ozarks, you know, these are places that I recognize Donald Trump. This has been my whole life. I'm like, oh, it took a while for this to nationalize. But I remember when I was in college, there was a state rep who would just go door to door and knock on doors. And my grandparents, who, I don't know, he might have been the only Democrat they ever voted for. But they were like, and I remember Mike Schilling, and this is the Ozarks, you wouldn't know his name. He was anti-death penalty. His nickname with the Republicans was the Communist. He was not. And I remember my grandfather, they, you know, with all the Republican signs, they put a Mike Schilling for state rep sign in their yard. And they said, I'm like, well, Gaga, why are you voting for him? And he was like, well, he came to my door and he asked for my vote. And I'll tell you another story about Ty Pinckney, the really extraordinary African-American Army vet running for Senate in Mississippi. And what he does, his last campaign, is he had to do it in different stages, but he ran from the northern border of Mississippi all the way down to the Gulf Coast. And he just went door to door, knocking on doors, shaking hands. And I mean, I think that's, how do we get through this? We do that, we get through it through that. And I think somehow human contact can cut through all the clutter. Because, you know, in the Ozarks, Rush Limbaugh existed. You know, and he's metastasized, right? It's more common. But Mike Schilling, you know, won a Republican district by just asking people for their votes. And I can tell you, in rural America, 20% of all Americans live in rural and small town America, 20%. And if we know about our electoral college, it's tilted toward rural states. How about the Senate? Is that tilted toward rural states? Do you think the Democratic Party knows that? Nope. They spend 3% of their money in rural America. And Corey, Pennsylvania. Does Trump win Corey, Pennsylvania these days? Yeah? How about 2008? Who won Corey, Pennsylvania in 2008? Barack Obama won all 4 wards, right? And why? Because he had people who went door to door. And Barack Obama in the swing states, okay, these are white majority, the swing states, all the swing states, when they went door to door, he increased the rural vote, mostly white, but not all, the rural vote by 8 to 12 points versus John Kerry and Al Gore. And I don't know how many times I've heard this from rural Democrats saying, when someone goes to the door, they're like, "You're the first person I've seen since 2008." And it's like what happened, and this is amazing. This is how Donald Trump wins, is that Barack Obama won in 2008, and all the Obama people thought that demography was destiny, and they didn't have to try anymore. And they literally, I'm not making this up, I've heard this from so many people who are in the know, they closed up all the offices, they quit organizing, they quit going, they think, they just ignore a state like Mississippi. They could win in Mississippi. Isn't that about racial justice last time I checked? And it's because of the urban coastal elite mindset that controls the Democratic Party. And when Republicans in Erie think they don't care about us, I've come to believe that they're right. I've come to finally accept that central critique. And until Democrats change that, Trump and Trumpism is going to win. And I hear what you're saying, because these are insane conversations, aren't they? Yeah.
Just two things. One is, my understanding was that the Harris campaign had a massive ground effort.
Yes. Yes.
Knocking on a lot of doors.
Yeah. 45 million. Yeah.
And that, okay,
Yeah.
Mr. Trump did not.
Yeah.
Right.
So I feel like the Democrats were out there knocking on doors.
Yeah.
But then the other question I had was, you've talked a lot about what the liberal elite,
Yeah.
social, whatever,
Yeah.
doesn't offer to young men.
Yeah.
Well, what does Trump offer
Yeah.
to young men? Why go to Trump?
I know, I hear what you're saying. It's elusive to me too. Yeah. Okay, so I was on TV, I don't know if anyone saw this, predicting that Kamala Harris would win. You know, and I thought Trump could win, but I was like, like you, I was like, Kamala Harris is going to win because she opened up 50 campaign offices. There were 12 paid staffers in Erie County. I mean, I don't blame Kamala Harris for losing that campaign. I blame Joe Biden for running. I blame the people around Joe Biden for letting him run. But I don't blame Kamala Harris. But I talked to, and again, I don't know this. I now talk to people who know things and they tell me things. This is what happened after 2016 when I was surprised by Trump. I'm like, I need to talk to people and I can learn things. And this was a liberal political strategist in Kansas City who works in kind of rural Midwest kind of house races. And I was like, tell me, why did Trump win? She had the ground game. And he started laughing. And he was like, Jeff, because I was exactly like you. He's like, Jeff, tactics are not strategy. And what happened is that you have a lot of very well-intentioned urban liberals who got on buses, right? And there were some local people, but I knew some professors at Gannon, good people, but they went out to Corey and went out to Albion to knock on doors. And the problem with that, it's well-intentioned, but it doesn't work. Neighbors have to talk to neighbors, and you have to build. When Obama in 2008, like that was an 18-month campaign, right? They didn't, I mean, poor Kamala Harris, right? I mean, she had 3 months. I mean, you know, I don't blame. Does that make sense? And so what you can't do is in 100 days get tens of thousands of out-of-towners and throw on a bus and go. In Mississippi, Brandon Presley, who is a fairly liberal Democrat from Mississippi, lost the Mississippi's governor's race in 25 by 20,000 votes. Okay? And why? Because what the Democratic Party did is they hired a bunch of Ohio canvassers to go to rural Mississippi, right? And we did the same thing in 24. And your question about what is it about Trump? I have students who voted for Trump, and they were like, Trump was on these Twitch streams, which is, I don't know, these video game playing sites.
Joe Rogan.
Yeah, Trump is what, 80 years old? He's old, right? He ran circles around the Democrats in sort of a social media strategy aimed at young people. And I mean, Democrats, like, not only, you know, Donald Trump not only stole the Democrats' lunch money, he made them sit there and watch them eat their lunch. You know what I mean? Because he just did a better job at talking to young people. And in 20, Trump was not popular with college students, but I think this semester, Trump was pretty popular on campus.
The other thing, I was going to say, speaking to the 45 million, it's not just getting out, it's who you're talking to. So you have staffers who have the super voters, and so you know who's voting. You know who they want to talk to? The people who are going to vote.
Yep, I got
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why are you talking to me?
So while they were out there, they were just talking to a lot of them.
Yeah.
It's either wits are wrong too, because I worked on Hillary's campaign and on Complex campaign, and a lot of the lists that they have are wrong because the lists haven't been updated to see the large number of Democrats that have changed to Republican. Look in Pennsylvania, people who changed their vote or registered for the first time. Republicans have it way over Democrats. And yeah, they did. I worked at Complex campaign. Busloads of, I can say black women came from Buffalo, and they went all out to get people motivated to vote, but it doesn't work. I think part of the problem is a lot of the issues and causes of social justice that Democrats care about. The people that we care about aren't the people that traditionally go out and vote. Like you're working on their behalf, but they don't care enough to show up at the polls to support what you're promoting.
And you have to talk about it in ways that are culturally familiar, right? I mean, I grew up working class, so I'm bicultural. I speak fluent and conservative. And I know if I talk about college football, right? You talk about things that, and highly educated people who only grew up in that world, I mean, God love them, right? But, there are 3,300 counties in America. Take a guess how many county chairs Democrats have out of those 3,300 counties. 300. Colin Allred in Texas, right? Great African-American candidate, smart football player, played for Baylor. You're like, Colin Allred can beat Ted Cruz. He never campaigned in rural Texas, which has the largest rural vote of any state in America. He had no chance of winning. No chance. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hi. Well, I'm a 32-year-old white woman, and I've spent my entire life being a pretty fierce feminist advocating for women. And it wasn't until I moved to Erie about 3.5 years ago, I started to feel more aware of what you're talking about today, of this loneliness, of this this feeling amongst white men. And I think part of what brought me here today was to hear more about that and to get that advocacy for it and that affirmation that that's a real thing that we're all kind of starting to feel. And I guess the question, as it always is where do we go from here?
Yeah.
And I hear you saying that yes, it's politics. Yes, it's the class divide. And I really appreciated you saying, it's about the conversations and the facts and coming to that impasse. And maybe if we had children, right, if we had little boys, we could say, well, we work on that, right? We work on training young men to feel valued and empowered. And I don't assume that you're here today to tell us what to do.
Yeah.
It's more of just, this is a thing. This is a thing we're all aware of, or not aware of, and let's talk about it. And that's what Jefferson Educational Society is about, is here's a topic, let's talk about it. But maybe if anyone else wanted to kind of talk about what they think, like, where do we go from here? What do we do?
Yeah. I just want to, when I think it's about white men, but I think it's about all men, right? And but that's a good question. First we recognize it's a problem. And I mean, I think part of the Trump revolt, and I think I say this in class, and because I don't think my students know generally how I vote. And like, however you feel about Donald Trump, I think many of the issues he brings up are legitimate. The problems of globalization, I'm a free trader, but heck, I'm a professor, right? I'm not the one who lost my job. And we need a free trade system. We need an economy that you don't have to have a 4-year college degree to be middle class. And, we have a Democratic Party that says it in the head, but doesn't feel it in the heart and the gut, because they're not working class people anymore. At the head, our own Erie County Democratic Party, I think, is quite good, right? I think they're pretty connected. But, look, they have 4-year college degrees, right? And I would like to see more working class people. I think there was a study, and there was only one member of Congress, or only one Democrat in Congress, and that's AOC. And I believe there's a woman in Washington State, so it's 2 who have a working class background. We need more working class people, right? Who helping to make national policy, Democrat or Republican, because the Republicans, they all went to the same school the Democratic elites went to. Go ahead, ma'am. Yeah.
So I have
Yeah.
a question
Yeah.
based off that. How do we create a system in which working class people can contribute to those conversations?
Yeah.
Because if you are working 40 hours a week at one job and 25 hours a week at your second job, just where do you find the time to be able to participate?
Yeah. No. Yeah. No. Look, this is the problem. That my first book was about this. Like, well-intentioned, educated liberals, like the primary system was rotten in the before 1972, where if you voted in the primaries, it wasn't binding, right? But now what it means is everybody in this room, I bet you, we vote in primaries, and working class people don't. And working class people get left out in both the Republican and Democratic Party. I don't know, but I think the first thing is to recognize that we have a class bias, and we don't talk about class, and the class cuts through race. And I think William Julius Wilson is correct. The decline, race matters in America. Like, I'm from the South. I live in Erie, Pennsylvania, which was ranked one of the worst cities to be African American. I'm not blind to these things. But there's a declining significance of race, and that we have to realize that class matters in America probably more than it has in a century. And I think for educated folk, for us to at least acknowledge that, that's at least a start.
I think it's interesting. I think especially, and you're probably not be happy to be on the spot. It's already that. We're in a relationship. I am not working class. He is. We both have bachelor's degrees, but our stories about our workplaces are drastically different. The things that we both encounter and the stories that he tells about the men that he works with, totally different than my office environment. And I almost wouldn't have believed that that was real if I didn't hear it front hand.
Should write a book. NPR would be shocked, right? If you listen to NPR, it's such a different. I used to be an NPR junkie, and I can barely listen to it these days. Okay, I'm not nuts, but I've become more aware. I don't know about you, sir. I'm so aware of my class upbringing, living in an educated environment. Like, for professors who come from working class backgrounds, we're like dogs at a dog park. We can sniff each other out. We're just like, oh my God, what are these people complaining about? We don't work, right?
He's like, oh, you're tired? I've been on my feet all day. Yeah. Word. And obviously what I do is difficult as well, but it's just a totally different world that I wasn't aware of, especially moving to Erie where there's a lot more, what is it, corporate word, industrial profession.
Yeah, just what do we do? I don't fully know, but becoming aware of it, building relationships. Go ahead, sir, please.
I'm surprised you haven't mentioned the elephant of office. People ask about Trump's appeal.
Yeah.
I think there's also a movement within intelligentsia, and in part because of gains when they're made, there's a lack of discrimination between toxic masculinity, which exists, and masculinity. And I think masculinity has become a dirty word. It's okay for men to be masculine, toxically masculine. I think there have been a number of stories, and you have Me Too movement, and all these things, which again, not as bad in itself, but I think there's a lot of men. It's exemplified by the 42nd Amendment, which I think is a great white law issue for this, where that is a masculinity issue. And I think that's why Trump is appealing to young men in theory, but any class. I think that's part of it, is he's become identified as a masculinity advocate.
Mm-hmm.
And people overlook the toxic part of his masculinity, which is clearly there.
Yeah.
But it all gets rolled into one, and I think that's what's difficult for men. One of the difficulty with men, I think, going to higher education is that higher education is seen as more interest.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's at an unconscious level. I think that's Kelly's men. I think that's a distinct fact. It's like girls are better in school, girls are smarter, they get better educations. I want to be there. To where colleges that you also have to tilt admissions to allow men with lower academic status just balance out the sex ratios.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think in the left liberal intelligentsia, there is and I wouldn't have said this 3 years ago, but a bias against, even though toxic masculinity exists, it absolutely does. A bias against certain ways of men behaving. I mean, I think of, and also like, if Donald Trump is our culture's biggest number one example of what a man is, we think of 17 years ago, it was Barack Obama, right? Who coached his daughter's basketball team, loved basketball. I mean, that wasn't that long ago. I don't know how many working class white guys I grew up with who voted for Obama in 2008. Yeah. They loved Obama, right? And then they vote for Trump. Yeah, he could talk like a regular guy, but yeah. Yeah.
He's addicted to his crackberry.
Yeah. Look, I think you're correct, and in my world, that's why I give these talks. I'm trying to nudge at least my corner of academia to at least recognize this issue, and because I do think it's a problem that young men don't feel welcome in a classroom in which, I don't know, masculine. I mean, if it's a literature class, we should be critiquing men and too many men in the canon. But I think it's overused at this point. It's like my stepdaughter groaning about a white man writing a book, where it is. I don't know. It's. I think we just go to that too often, and yeah. So I don't want to keep people here too late. But go ahead. Yeah.
I'm curious. I grew up. My dad was a steel worker for 38 years. Grew up in the heart of steel industry outside of Pittsburgh. Democrat. Today, where the registration is still more than 2-to-1 Democrat, every row house is held by a Republican.
Mm-hmm.
I just moved here a year ago from very rural Pennsylvania, and communication and relationships, as we've talked about. It seems to me we've lost the ability to communicate together.
Yes.
I'm out in rural Pennsylvania, and I'm saying to people, let me take you to Pittsburgh. Let's engage in a conversation, and they're afraid to go. And then I talk to people in Pittsburgh that say, well, I'm afraid to go. But I come here tonight and I hear you say there was 12 Democratic full-time workers here. Well, I just came out of Venango County. About a third are registered Democrats. I can't remember the last time I had somebody knock on my door. And the truth
probably 08.
Well, the truth is, it can be dangerous to knock on somebody's door.
Yeah, that's what I hear from Democrats. Yeah, no, it's real. That's a real thing.
So
it goes both ways, though.
Yeah.
I'll tell you some stories. That's a Republican.
Yeah.
How do we open those
I'm sure.
avenues of communication this gentleman was talking about, where we can sit around the table and have a conversation?
Yes.
The conversation you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'm old. I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum. I've got like 40 years in, but I still want to know not only what she wants to know, but my 28-year-old daughter that's a nurse at the hospital, or my 14-year-old granddaughter who's in a high school, rural high school.
Mm-hmm.
Having those conversations has become more and more difficult, and I think part of that is we've lost the local communication.
Local newspapers, local radio, yes,
local
yes,
radio. I just came from Bernalillo County where there's no local TV.
yeah.
Just what?
These are media deserts now, yeah.
We need to find a way that you understand what it is to live in downtown area or Pittsburgh or New York City, and what the reality is of living in rural Pennsylvania. I was curious if you could, I want to be a part of helping that happen. How do we do that?
And again, this is both Republican and Democrat, but the Democratic, rural Democrats I know, there is a real recognition that the grassroots need to go out and remember Howard Dean in the 50 state strategy. It's a 3,300 county strategy, and look, it's only 17 years ago, which is not that long. But now, look, I hear this, right? That, Republicans, if they're going to go to a Democratic neighborhood, get probably screamed at about being a Trumpist and called all kinds of things. And, I know this. I know somebody who ran in rural Erie County as a Democrat, and they had to have somebody go with them. But we have to start, at least politically doing that again, right? And and I've heard this again and again from these rural Democrats, when you go out and you knock on doors and people shake your hand. I know this woman in rural Kansas, and she's from California, but they live in rural southeast Kansas, and she runs a whiskey honky-tonk in a small town in Kansas. And she went door to door. She got stomped in her state representative race, though she got 2 more points than the other Democrat. And a conservative came into her bar, because it's a whiskey. Distills whiskey? Is that what you do with whiskey? You distill it? And he said, I've never voted for a Democrat in my life. I'm the most conservative person I know, but I voted for you, right? And I think it's one conversation. Again, I was inspired by Barack Obama in 2008, and Republican or Democrat, right? I mean, that's the way back, is to believe in our fellow Americans again. That, like Trump's vision of America doesn't have to be our destiny. He wins, I think, when we sometimes understandably imbibe that view, that the other in rural America or urban America are our enemy. And I've just decided I try not to believe that. And we do that one conversation at a time. And I know that's not a real answer. But what I've started doing since about 2020 is I do a lot of writing and I go do a lot of traveling to places that I wouldn't ordinarily have gone, and I learn a lot. I just came back from rural Western Tennessee writing about something, and the Republicans I ran into were, some of them were really inspiring. There's a really great county mayor in Weakley County, Tennessee. He was he ran, the Republican Party would not endorse him because they didn't believe he was pro-Donald Trump enough, even though he voted for him. And he ran as an independent, and he won 2-1 against like the Trump Republican machine because he went door to door, and he's a really good guy, really smart kid, played college quarterback at Rhodes College in Memphis, married this Mexican-American woman from California when he lived out there as a sports agent, and then moved home. And it broke every stereotype that all of us would have, even me, son of the rural South, about rural Republicans. And so the more I get out there, the more of an America that I grew up with, I think actually exists. And I don't think I'm wrong about that. No. And I think what social media tells us, they make money when we get mad. Or scared. And I have social media, I get scared, I get mad, then I have to tell myself, I don't know, I'm not sure if I believe that. And go ahead, sir.
Just real quick, pumping up Gannon University.
Yeah.
Okay. About 6 years ago, a graduate from Gannon University, Chris Fra, in Lawrence County, was a registered Republican, ran Republican, and a Democrat. Newcastle the incumbent was a 4-term mayor, Democrat. He went door to door. He had a budget of $250 when he started. He knocked on 1,500 doors. And it wasn't the knocking on the door. It was knocking and staying, and then coming back. That was the key. The repeat visit.
Yeah.
And he won
First African American.
I remember, yeah. I don't remember him, but I remember reading about that. Yeah. No, relationships. Yeah.
He went back, and they said, "Oh, we didn't expect you to come back because everyone comes one time, you know." Blah, blah, blah. And he went back.
Doesn't that undermine my stereotype of rural Pennsylvania, right? And that's really interesting. Both things can be true, right? Are there racists there? Sure. Can you overcome that? Sure. Yeah.
Just want to put that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I think one thing that we're missing and that you're talking about in some way is respect for other people.
Yes.
Exactly.
Making the course door to door, like the gentleman said there, is that shows respect.
Yes. Yes.
So that's what we're saying a lot of times.
Yeah. No, I get frustrated with my professor colleagues who demean Trump voters, and I get very, you know, like, if you don't like Donald Trump, don't act like him. You know, like, I mean, again, and like, if people do, I don't care how people vote, and I can understand why someone would vote for Donald Trump, even if I might not. But yeah, I think it's essential that we start respecting, and then it can be hard, can it? But I think you're totally correct.
Right, but you also have to listen.
Yeah, yeah, listen and respect. Yeah, I mean, it's like being I mean, I know it's hackneyed, but being the change you want to see in the world. And that's what Donald Trump has done for me, and I'm actually thankful for that. Yes, sir.
And when and people not want to listen? When they're afraid, and if they're angry.
Yeah.
And if fear and anger drive political, then still fun. Or fear that maybe that's not political view, maybe it's an economic view.
Yeah.
That's where you hold that somebody. Yeah, but you don't want to give that.
Mm-hmm.
So the respect that is very important.
Yeah.
Wherever that is.
We have to start.
If somebody wants to go someplace they're not, the more isolated you are, that's come on. Where you are, let's get or to open for a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. If people need to leave, I totally understand that. That's totally fine. I couldn't agree more. Yes.
So to kind of connect these ideas of respect and of communication and connection, where do you think we can go to connect men with examples of positive masculinity?
Yeah, it's a great question.
They need experience and success.
Yeah. No, I mean, I mean, it's a great. I think there's a real, you know, because young men need to see that counterexample, don't they? And I don't know, Paris.
I would possibly as some. I don't know if this is direct response to your question, but we can get past issues of race and even class if we can agree that we're all hurt. Yeah, hurt is what binds. So let's talk about through those issues as opposed to the partialization, these arbitrary into it's class or race or gender or like that. Because one of the things I wanted to offer to whoever was we should not miss an opportunity. We are really good at it as Americans in missing opportunities. You had women's suffrage, but it was white women. And there were all these other women who said, what about us? And then it came back again in the 60s, National Organization of Women. Another opportunity, same opportunity for black men in voting, blah, 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 blah. There are things that galvanize us that we can get past the other issues. And so whoever asks the question about how do you do this, there are opportunities. I'm absolutely strongly believe that there are opportunities everywhere if we just recognize them as opportunities. And that is, if I'm hanging out with you at church or in bowling alley, whatever, that might be the only place I get you. So we got to talk. And then the next opportunity, and then the next opportunity. It's got to be important to me to advance the issue, because no one is going to if they're not thinking about it, they want to invite this conversation. So if I'm thinking about it through my pain, through my anger, whatever, but I'm here, we're selective audience, then it's got to become a moral issue for me. I'm going to reach out to as many people, and hopefully I can convince. It's the whole idea, each one reach one kind of deal, teach one, each one, whatever.
Yeah.
That's how it's a slow process.
Yeah.
But it is one person, a micro relationship at a time until it becomes a group. And I don't think we should miss the opportunity. We all know people who are hurting.
Yeah, we are all influencers in the social media age. I mean, it's a great question because, you know, I wait for someone on the left side, right, or someone on the right side who is a different masculine example than Donald Trump to emulate what it means to be masculine, and I think a more positive example of what it means, you know, what men are. Yes, sir, Luke. That's fine. We should go. Okay. Okay. Oh, we got to get out of here. Working class people unite. We got to let the workers go. Thank you for being such a good audience. Thank you very much. Thank you.